and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Mr. Sidney Brownwood.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to this, the latest TooFatLardies Oddcast, as our merry band get back together again to discuss all things lard-related in the miniature wargaming hobby. Without further ado, let me welcome my two colleagues, a veritable Robin Hood and Friar Tuck of wargaming, Nick Skinner and Richard Clark. Gentlemen, welcome indeed back to the Oddcast.
Hello, grabbers.
Hello, Sydney. Hey, nonny.
Yes, here we meet again under the great oak.
That's fantastic. How are you both? I can see you there, sort of in my mind's eye, roasting venison poached in the King's forests.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. They're your forests, Sid. You see, we've been in the grounds of Roundwood Towers, rifling through your stock of pheasants, not to mention your peasants. But so it's true medieval fest.
I've got a selection of very aggressive squirrels, some rather fat pigeons, and there was a rabbit in the garden the other day. So who knows? Who knows? Venison, not yet.
No, indeed. Well, so that's interesting.
I thought you were talking about Barry Venison, who used to play for Liverpool, and didn't he play for England as well?
I've not seen him in my garden yet.
Not your code, Rich, is it? Not your
Not
code.
my code.
Well, maybe they could get him back from retirement or wherever he is, and get him in the England team.
We can kill him and eat him.
Yeah.
I'm sure that will be appealing to him.
Well, when we met last time, we were just coming out of lockdown and tentatively returning to the club and starting to socialise again. And that was 6 weeks ago. I can hardly believe it, but it was 6 weeks ago. So let me ask you both, how has the process of reintegrating into society and the hobby of wargaming been for you both after such a long period of lockdown incarceration?
Yeah, it's well, I've actually been on holiday as well, which is one of the reasons why it's been 6 weeks. And you know what it's like. The week before is always hectic. The week when you get back is always hectic. So a week's holiday actually buggers your life up for 3 weeks, really. So, but yeah, and that was weird, going out for meals and so on and so forth, which was really nice. Elizabeth and I, my wife and I, booked a holiday, and then both our daughters decided they were going to come and join us. So it was great fun. It was a nice social time, and of course we've been going back to the club, which has been a bit odd at first, really, to be back in the room with that selection of freaks and weirdos. But we've managed to get a few games in. I think we've been limbering up, really. We've not really got back onto the main event yet in terms of getting back play testing, because I think it's been such a shock to the system to be back playing games that we've gone with tried and tested games. So we've done a bit of, well, we did your Arnhem Chain of Command game, didn't we, Nick? We've been playing a few bits of things like Chain of Command and Sharp Practice just to get back in the swing of things. What was that game, Nick? Where was that set?
We did a game set in St Erdenrode, so it was the initial capture of the town square, which is one of the scenarios in the Market Garden supplement, which I can assure people does exist and is getting closer slowly.
I think that's something that we do need to touch on, is the fact that it's, whilst we've been in lockdown, it's actually been pretty impossible to develop projects which were at a certain stage. Things like Infamy, things like O Group, which had gone through intensive play testing before lockdown, we were able to complete. But things like Market Garden and Infamy, the second part of Infamy with the Carthaginians and the likes, it's really been impossible to carry on running with that ball. So it's now a case of feeling that after a year, pretty much, of being in lockdown, we're now able to pick up the ball again and get running with it. But it's sometimes a bit difficult to go from a standing start. So we've been limbering up a bit to get ourselves back into the swing of things, haven't we?
We most definitely have, yes. So I was able to get to 2 sessions of the club before my daughter returned from university and brought COVID back with her, and then I had to self-isolate. So I guess I've missed a fair few, but luckily all has ended well on that front. So we think we're back to normal and hopefully coming out of lockdown soon.
Sydney, what have you been up to?
Yeah, well, I came to the club a couple of times. I must say it was quite strange. And quite strange in all sorts of ways because, being inside with other people, I think we've all done our lateral flow tests and been vaccinated. It was quite strange for a number of reasons. I thought when we were in lockdown, especially about a year ago, coming back to the club would be this huge emotional experience with everyone in tears and, completely over the top and just reassured that we're all still alive. It wasn't at all like that. It was as if we had a 2-week break and we were back there. All the same people were there. Some had slightly bigger beards or slightly bigger sort of tubbiness around the waist in a couple of circumstances. But apart from that, it was reassuringly exactly the same, which was very nice in its own way.
I have to say, Sid, when you walked in, I saw a few people burst into tears, but
they did that very well, I must say, and it was good. We don't like overly emotional displays of affection.
No, good Lord, we're British.
Bursting into tears is one thing, but running for the exits is something completely different. That's normally what he gets.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the most important thing now, apart from just sort of meeting up with people and starting to play games again, is really, despite continued restrictions, we're at least able to get on with some of those gaming projects that have been trapped on the back burner for some time. So I think with that in mind, it's a really good time to go over to the workshop to see what we've all been busy with. So here we are, back in the workshop, 6 weeks on, and just as much litter around the floor. And we've got boxes, we've got sort of sawn in half horses, we've got goodness knows what, MDF all over the place. My guess is that what we've been doing is largely project driven, and it looks like these projects are well underway. So chaps, what are the big projects on your workbench at present?
So we've been doing different things, and I remember when we did an Oddcast after Christmas, we said all these grand things about projects we were going to plan, and we can come back to that in a bit, but I'm not actually working on any of those pretty much. Market Garden still goes ahead. Since we last met, I don't know if you can tell by this lovely orange gown that I'm wearing, but I've become the most biggest celebrity wargamer in Holland since we last came together. The Market Garden project has gone international and been picked up by the local newspapers of Vekel in Holland, and I'm contacted by the local newspaper after I put a tweet on about the buildings that we were using for Market Garden, the buildings that I had from Patrick Miniatures. Remember those that were on the bench?
We do.
And I put them on Twitter with a wording that says, Vekel, here we come. And of course, the local press picked up on that, and I think they thought we were going to invade them or something. But they did a feature on the games that we were doing around Market Garden and put it in the local paper. And since then, I've had 7 or 8 emails from people who live in the town inviting me round for tea so they can show me the bullet holes and combat damage that's been done to their house, which has been great fun, really interesting, and actually hopefully maybe has given us some context where we can go around when we can. Holland, we can have a cup of tea or something nice to do with that. So the building projects around that is still going strong. I actually yesterday bought, after I saw Jasper had a lovely church that he got from Total Battle Miniatures. I went online yesterday and I spent 200 quid on buildings from Total Battle Miniatures, including a different church, not the church that Jasper had, but they do a nice black powder church, which I thought looked rather tasty. So the building work is continuing. I'm now working on bases for my buildings as well, because when we did the games at the club and I put them on the table, I just thought they look okay, but they need more around them. So I've been thinking about, do I base the buildings directly, or do I create bases that I can put the buildings on and move them off and put different buildings on that same base? So I've been basing them, and I've been using cork table mats, which is a really good size for that. So I've got some old table mats, and I've been using those because they're the right kind of thickness. They're the equivalent of a 3mm MDF, really, with a bit of a cork on the top. So if you flip them upside down and put the pretty seaside picture at the bottom, you can build up the terrain on them because they're nice and stable. They're not going to warp.
Yeah.
And they come out really nicely. So I'm in mid-flow with those at the moment, which has been really, really good fun. So that's my first one. I've got two others. Do you want me to go on with those, or do you want to go to Rich?
No, you go for it, mate. I was just glad that you weren't in Guantanamo in that orange gown. I was a bit worried about where we were contacting you from. But
so yeah, well, the second one for me has been the Mexicans. Of course, the Mexicans are still ongoing, still building up my forces for the Texan War of Independence. Really lovely period for sharp practice, and something which is a fire that was started by Colin Murray when we did the thing in the Lard special. We know, so they're building up, still working on those and painting those quite slowly, but getting them through. You don't need a big force for this. I am literally going to be sticking to less than 50 figures aside for the Mexicans. They've been really, really good fun to paint. Lovely, almost Napoleonic, but not quite as difficult as Napoleon. Not quite as lacy. A bit more fun. Some good conversions, head swaps, some sombreros being swapped for the odd shako to give them a bit of that kind of Mexican authenticity. I feel that's been worth the time. Really enjoying that. And then the other thing I've revisited is Hello Sailor. So we did many years ago some work on a rule set, World War II naval wargaming. We called it Hello Sailor, and I think it was there's lots of Twitter coverage in May around the Battle of the Denmark Strait, because it was 80 years? Would it be 80 years since?
Yeah.
Since the Bismarck, the Battle of Denmark Strait.
Yeah.
Good, Bismarck, etc. Which has always been an encounter that's fascinated me, and the whole World War II naval interest for me is driven by that encounter. And I was reading that the Hood fired 10 salvos and didn't get any hits at all on the Bismarck. And of course, the Bismarck or Prince Eugen sank the Hood, blew it up very quickly. And I was thinking about the wargaming outcome of that. Imagine a wargame in which you, as the British admiral, fired 10 times at the German battleship and you never hit it. You'd say, what a crap game this is. What do I do to hit this? So it made me interested in Hello Sailor again. So I got that out. 2007 it was. 2007 that we did the last playtest of that. And I got it out to give it a playtest. And I started to do the Battle of Denmark Strait. And I realized that to do that, I would need to custom create 25 playing cards. And I thought, bugger that for a game of soldiers. We need to rework this to something a bit more up to date. So I've been working on Hello Sailor, thinking about the turn sequence in particular, but also thinking about what toys I'm going to use for it, because I don't want to spend loads of money on some, on fleets for what for me is it's an interesting game, but it's not going to be my main product. I haven't got storage space. I need something simple. I don't want to paint loads of ships. So I've got our chum at Sabotage, Paul Edwards, to go ahead and to get us underway with some 3D printed naval ships that are approximately 1/5000th, I think, or 1/6000th in scale. And I thought, I'm never going to paint these. So what am I going to do is Paul's designed them so they're on little blocks. So what we've done is sprayed the blocks red and blue, and I'm going to have a red fleet and a blue fleet. Now, people can make detailed models of whatever ships they want, but for me, the simplicity is it then looks like a plotting table. I've got my little dotted line of red ships and my little dotted line of blue ships, and I can fight any action I want to with those blocks, really. So I'm really getting quite excited by the idea we're going to play test Hello Sailor a bit more and get some of those games out on the table.
Oh, that's a blast from the past, a rave from the grave, a classic from the attic.
All those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, I haven't been doing anything so retro. I've been looking forward. Look to the future now. It's only just begun, as a wise man once said. And I've been painting Carthaginian geezers. In fact, as we've been speaking during the duration of this program so far, I've just stuck 32 of them on pennies. I painted up a mixture of Aventine miniatures and Crusader miniatures. with Victrix Roman scutums, because I really like the Victrix Roman scutum transfers you can get from Little Big Man Studios. And I wanted to do some groups for the second part of Infamy, which were Carthaginians with captured Roman equipment. So that's been interesting to do. What I found really odd is that I used a more sort of olive tanned skin color for the Carthaginians, because these are meant to be sort of Libyans. And it's odd because they don't look like they're finished, because I know a lot of people paint faces first, but I paint faces last, because for me, the figure comes to life when you paint the skin and the faces. Well, I painted the skin and the faces, but because it's a kind of light brown color, it doesn't look like they're finished. So I'm kind of just trying to get my head around that. But they are rather funky. They are good. So I've been doing that. On my paint desk, I've got my Australians and Chindits for the Far East, because, of course, we touched on this in the introduction. It has been really, really impossible to focus on trying to get things like the Far East Handbook, the Arnhem supplement, and the second part of Infamy on the go, because there's obviously so much work that we have to do on the War Games table. And whilst I can solo game stuff and Nick can solo game stuff, really you want to be in an environment where you've got a sounding board of at least one other person. And that's the reason why we've got such a positive playtest group, is that those ideas are batted around fast and furiously, sometimes far too fast. But that's part of the design process, is managing that information that other people are putting in. But without those other people putting that information in, to be honest, it's you're ploughing a lonely furrow. And I don't think that's when you produce your best work. So I'm very much focused on what I'm doing there. So that's really me. But Sid, you and I had a game of something new the other day. Talking of looking forward, our blades were flashing, were they not, Sir Sidney Ronbois?
They were flashing in the 17th century setting of the French Three Musketeers. So one of the things that we've been working on, me and Nick and you, for about a couple of years now, fairly quietly under the radar, has been a game which is a small game based on the Three Musketeer books by Alexandre Dumas. So we got that out for the first time last week. And this is a game that we're working on, and we've been sort of asked to work on, and we're very pleased to work on with Martin at War Bases. So we've done some painting. I've painted up most of the Cardinal's Guard and also the Three Musketeers. I know Nick's been doing some as well. So we split the figures between us. And this would be a small game, really based on a pretty tiny table by comparison to some of the other things that we've been doing. So the game that we had the other day at your house, Rich, was on an 18-inch square board. It's a short duration game. It's about an hour to an hour and a quarter, about 10 to 20 figures a side, although actually we had less on the table at the time that we were playing. And we're really looking forward to it. I think it'll be a lot of fun. It's a small pickup game, very manageable, very portable, not much needed really to get started on that. So we've almost done all the figures, and we'll be working on the terrain soon. And lots of ideas which we've been batting back and forward on texts relating to that. And I think that'll be just a lot of fun. It's probably not a game that's going to take an afternoon or a morning, but it's going to be hopefully atmospheric, fun, furious and fast. And as you say, Rich, blades will be flashing.
They will. The interesting aspect of that is also going to be how that works inside a narrative campaign setting where your characters are going to be gaining honor and so on and so forth, and that's going to influence their relationship with the Sun King at the center of that spider's web of Renaissance France. So that's good fun. But yeah, so we're all busy. As you say, Sydney, it's all project related.
We've got, new stuff, old stuff boiling up. We've got stuff that's a long runner that we've been working on for how are we gonna manage this?
Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. That's an interesting. How are we gonna manage it? Well, I think the answer to that is we don't really worry about that. We just kind of go with the flow, because that's when things work, isn't it? If you kind of create a diary and say, right, we want to have that finished by October and we want that finished by April of next year, we know very well that that doesn't relate to the way we work, and we're just going to follow whatever meandering path of anarchy that we enjoy following. And I think that's part of the pleasure of developing rules. Grabbers.
Well, hold that point for a moment, because that
Yeah.
anarchy is something that I'm sure we've all had dealing with our projects. It's great to see them starting, developing, coming to fruition. That's all very positive stuff. But this might be something that might be the heart of a big issue. And it's time now to move on to our big issue and find out who our special guest is waiting for us in the TooFatLardies recording studio.
Sydney Roundwood's Sofa of Sincerity.
Gentlemen, welcome back to the Sofa of Sincerity. As we've seen, we've all been busy with new projects. So what I'd like to discuss today is how we set about planning for a new project and how we go about turning those plans into reality. Now, knowing both of you very well, the planning can be sometimes a bit haphazard, and I'm the same. So we thought we'd invite a friend of Lard onto the show, who I know is a lot more organised. So today we're joined by Colin Murray. Colin, come on down. Welcome to the Oddcast.
Hello, how you doing?
We are very well, thank you, sir.
Good
Now,
to see you, Colin.
Good to see you all.
To see you. Nice.
Nice. Yes.
Now, Colin, you're originally from Scotland, but now living in sunny Devon in the southwest of England. And over the years, I mean, all of us have taken part in the games that you've put on at various shows and games days. And we've seen you put together several projects for all sorts of different periods of history. But before we start talking about that, we're going to ask you, how did you first make contact with the world of Lard and Lardy rules?
I think probably the first thing I saw was going around war game shows and seeing probably Sharp Practice and Through the Mud and Blood up on stands being advertised. And I'm pretty sure I must have seen one of your games at Salute and things like that, maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago, something like that. But the first set of rules I ever actually bought was Through the Mud and Blood. And I bought that when I was still living in Luton, of all places. So I joined a local war games club, which was sort of 75% to 85% Warhammer, and me and maybe 4 guys playing historical games in the corner. And we started playing a very British Civil War. All that kind of stuff was about then. So I painted up loads of figures, and I was looking for a suitable rule set, and I came across, can't quite remember how I came across them, but I came across Through the Mud and Blood and bought them, and that was the first sort of Lardy game I ever played. And then moved on to Sharp Practice. I remember getting a review copy of Ducks years ago now, and I tried that out at the time. And then, yeah, it's ballooned from there. Chain of Command was the big one, really, that came out, and I really got stuck into that big time. But since moving down to Devon and joining the War Games Club down here, that's my interest in historical and the ability to play games and having a solid club of people that can bounce ideas off and play games with has really kicked things into the stratosphere. And it's generally, if I'm not playing a Lardy's game down the club, then I'm not that happy, to be fair. That's pretty much how it's worked so far.
Well, one of the things with all of those games, I know that I played in the Jazz Age game set in Afghanistan in 1920 at Southampton in 2020, just over a year ago. It's a fantastic game. It's really, really well set up game, the figures, the terrain, everything. And what really impressed me was that everything looked together as a project to be really well thought through. It wasn't the biggest game, it didn't have the most terrain or the most figures, but everything you'd done, and there were quite a lot of figures and quite a lot of terrain, but everything you'd done really fitted together really well as a project. And I think that's true of the other games that I've seen you put on. And that's what I think we've all been secretly quite jealous about, but also really interested about, how you manage to plan these periods, not just the games, but the periods.
Yeah, can I just jump in there and say that the first game of Collins that I played was at Clotted Lard. I think it was the first Clotted Lard.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Which was a Tudor-type game set in the Netherlands, the Spanish Netherlands, which was stunning to the extent that I did consider killing Colin and stealing all the figures. Nick, and you, of course, have been inspired by filibusters. Have you considered killing Colin?
In our recent Discord game, he was treated to the cheese wire encounter that so many have enjoyed.
Oh,
And he responded in traditional Scottish way by wanting to give his assailant the Glasgow kiss, I think is the terminology. Yeah, his filibuster article or series of articles really in Lard Magazine 2020 really stuck out to me as something that tickled me. There's loads of good content in that one, and when I was putting it together, doing the editing of it, however, the only one that really made me want to go out and buy some new figures was Collins. Was the one around the Mexican expeditions, and so that's what got me really connecting into the Alamo. Slightly different period, but actually really interesting and very inspirational what you did there, Colin.
So can I ask, Colin, one of the things that struck me is that every time I see you, every season, you seem to have a new game, and it almost seems that you decide, right, this is the game that I'm going to be running this season. You plan it, you execute it, it looks fabulous, and then next season you move on to something even more spectacular. It's a bit like one of those Strictly Come Dancing. Every new series is slightly more sparkly and better. How do you do it? Would you say you do it like that? Do you sit down and plan, or how does it work?
I definitely do it. I definitely do it like that. I definitely have a sort of the idea that Clotted Lard comes along or another deadline comes along and I want to have a new game to put on. This year's been obviously quite difficult because there's been less events, no events. So it's hard to get something done when you don't have a deadline. And it's that deadline that really kind of motivates me. But yeah, what you're saying is I want to have a new game every time. I want to, at Clotted Lard, show off the club, get people interested, have people sit down, and there's nothing better than someone sitting down and going, wow, this looks amazing, and then afterwards telling you had a great game. And that's kind of the motivation for it, really. And
wanting to kill you.
I didn't know that at the time. I might have been a bit more wary at the time sitting next to you. But I mean, it's what I found that motivates my gaming and my painting and things like that. So it has advantages to me, and it means other people get a cool game to sit down and play. So yeah, that's the way I think about it. September, when Clotted Lard comes along, I want to have a new game on the table people can play. Yeah.
And when you've got to that point that you think, well, I'm really going to do a new game, what then comes first? Is it the history, the sort of fascination of a particular period or an encounter? Or is it the figures, maybe? The fact that you've seen a particular figure range you really like? Or is it possibly you're thinking about the terrain? Or I'd really like to do a game which is set in Mexico in the Maximilian adventure. What comes first? Or is it just all blend together?
Usually it's the history. Usually there'll be something about the history that I find really, really interesting. The Dutch Revolt, which is the one that Rich played in, that's fascinating period. That's fascinated me for years. My now wife bought me a book that I remember reading on a beach in Italy. And she was happy sunbathing. I was happy reading a big, thick book about the Dutch Revolt. And it's that period, that history, the fact that there was so many political wranglings going on, the mixture of troops and types of battles that happened throughout that whole early period of the 80 Years' War. That just hooked me. And then at the time, there wasn't really a proper figure range for the Dutch Revolt. The Assault Group brought out figures now, which was great, but that wasn't what I started painting 5 years ago whenever I started that period. So you have to search and you have to make up your mind. You have to make a lot of decisions about, right, well, these aren't quite right, but I can do them. So the Dutch Revolt game has lots of figures from from all kinds of manufacturers. It's mostly Foundry stuff, but there's also fantasy figures. There's a load of fantasy figures in there from Games Workshop and a Spanish company called Game Zone, and loads of stuff just to get that right look and the impression of the units that I wanted.
So when you're on the beach then, Colin, with your lovely wife and your massive book of the Dutch Revolt, and you're looking around, you know, you're enjoying the sunshine, are you then thinking at that point, I'm going to play this, I'm going to play it with sharp practice, and I'm in your head, are you working out what figures you're going to get and how you're going to do that? How does the process work for you?
For maybe not for the Dutch Revolt ones, but certainly for the later ones, I'm for the filibusters and for the Northwest Frontier one. It was certainly a case of, right, yeah, I want to play this. How am I going to play this? What's the best set of rules for it? What are the best figures for it? What scale? I tend to go for 28mm because I'm quite lazy. Don't want to change scale size, so I tend to go for 28 all the time. And I'm a fairly avid sort of scroller of the internet. I kind of know most ranges of figures, so I already know what's out there. And if something comes along that's really nice looking, like the Empress Jazz Age ones came out, and I was like, oh, well, that would fit. That's the Northwest Frontier. That would fit spot on. And it just so happened that it was a happy accident that they sort of married together, and I decided, right, fine, that's where I want to go. And one of the big inspirations for that was the Foundry book about risings and rebellions. They did two really, really good books about small wars from, I think the first one was 1900 to the start of the First World War, and the second one was after the First World War to the start of the Second World War. And it's just about small conflicts, colonial conflicts throughout the world, with really nice black and white illustrations of the troop types and things like that. And they're really, really, really good books. They've done a whole range of them, and I think a lot of them are out of print now, and they're quite hard to get a hold of. But for inspiration purposes, they're fantastic because they describe small incidents in the wars, the troop types that are likely to be involved, the outcomes, and you can really sort of, it's a nice first step to investigating those kind of areas. So yeah, those books are really good, and like all wargamers, as soon as you start buying one book about a subject, it leads on to loads more books about subjects. And as long as you know where your second-hand bookshops are, you can have a field day buying silly amounts of books that the wife is more upset with than the miniatures.
So you got the idea before you have looked at the various figure ranges. What comes first then? And do you have a project schedule? Do you have a notebook in which it all goes down in? And what do you attack first? Do you sort of, I'm going to get the figures started, then we can use any sort of terrain which is appropriate, which is kind of what we've done with flashing blades? Or is it the case that you're trying to do it sort of stage by stage, so you've got a small game which goes to a medium-sized game, and then you eventually end up with a game that you want?
Usually it's the deadline comes first. So I'll say, right, I'm going to have a game ready for September for Clotted Lard, for instance. And then obviously decisions about what the period I'm going to do, all that. And then it's shopping. So the shopping part is the next part. So obviously I'm a father of four. I can't just throw 500 quid in 1 month on all the figures I need. So the shopping actually has to get broken down into chunks, just so that, right, I'll buy this lot and I'll maybe paint one force for one player, and then I'll get them painted, move on to the next. That's the theory. Obviously, the money burning a hole in your pocket occasionally has other ideas about what you're going to do with it. But the way I think about it is that I'm generally go for 4 players. So there'll be. I'm thinking of doing a game for 4 players, either at the club or at a games day. And so I'm thinking, right, what kind of force do these 4 players have? I'll generally try and have 4 different forces, or at least something different about each of the forces, so that they have slightly different games. For the filibusters one, the 2 filibusters forces were essentially identical, except one group had a unit of cavalry added as well. And then the Mexicans, there was a unit of regulars, and then there was militia running around in their sombreros and things like that. So I want to have 4 different kind of forces, just to make things interesting for me and interesting for the players. And it's breaking those figures down into those four forces rather than think of it as one massive game that allows me to sort of chunk it down into little bits.
So how do you, it sounds to me like you're talking about focus. You get this focus of the deadline and you work towards that. So you're a war gamer, you know, you say yourself, you consume the media, you listen, you're looking at new figure releases. How do you retain that focus? How do you stop yourself from, from something else glinting at you and saying, "Oh, come on, Colin, come and do this"? How do you control yourself? Is it self-flagellation on a nightly basis, or what is it that you do to keep yourself focused on where you're going?
Absolutely nothing. I'm just as bad as everybody else. But as soon as you go onto the website, as soon as you go onto Twitter, or as soon as you publish on your blog, right, I'm doing this, I'm getting ready for this date. Whether it doesn't matter whether anybody is listening or not, the fact that you've actually made a public announcement that this is what you're going to do and you're going to do it by this date, you kind of have that motivation to actually get it done. I started my blog.
He doesn't.
I started my blog about 10 years, well, maybe 12 years ago now. And it was for that very reason that I just want to make sure that I'm actually publishing stuff. I'm doing figures. I think the first posts I did was for a medieval army that I was doing for a WAB weekend up in Nottingham. And it was a way of motivating myself. If I didn't have that need to put something on the blog every week or two, then I wouldn't get anything done. I'd be sitting on my backside watching telly, because that's easy. You don't have to motivate yourself that way. The deadline and the idea that you've made a public sort of announcement of what you're doing, and then there's people going, I'm looking forward to that game and things like that. That is motivation for me. If you're going to let other people down, that's something you have to pull your finger out and get it done. And it works for me. Other things will work for other people. Everybody's different. Being a teacher, you know what motivates every other kid in your class is motivated in an entirely different way. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to be aware of your strengths. And my weakness is just sitting in front of the TV and eating nuts and beer.
No, that's fair enough. And you find, because we've talked about mojo and how we maintain mojo on this show in the past, and you find that does it for you. That ticks those boxes for you.
Yeah. To be fair, if I don't have a deadline, then I'll just, like everybody else, just go off and do other things. It's the deadline focus that keeps me going in the right direction. And once that's there, you tend to go, right, I need to get this done. I'm going to get this done. I find that doing a little bit of painting every day when you're doing that is the best way to tackle big units of figures. Being realistic though, sort of saying, well, I'll do all the belts on this unit 30 figures today, and then I'll do the hats tomorrow, or then those kind of things, rather than setting yourself massive goals that you're probably going to fail. Do little bits, and if you manage to get all the belts done, I can do the hats today as well, and that saves me from doing them tomorrow. So that motivation keeps building as they get closer and closer to being finished.
That motivation is something which works really well where it's paired with realism. You know, we've all been there with projects which get out of hand because you want to do too many things and it ceases to be realistic. But having a deadline and realism in mind, and then trying to do a little bit each time, that's the way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a wise man.
I can't do that.
No,
I just go on absolute painting bender. And paint and paint and paint and paint and paint, a bit like everything in my life, really. Whatever I'm doing, I do hugely intensely, and then at the end of it, I go, I can't do any more of that. And then I stop doing it until I fancy doing it again.
Yeah, I mean, I get big periods of not wanting to paint, and I used to get really stressed about it. I used to get really worried about it. Oh my God, I've got a garage full of figures. I'm never going to get painted. What's my wife going to do with them when I die? Etc. 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 But
arms around them is the answer. Arms around them, drinking gin.
Yeah, but a very wise man, I think it might have been Matt Slade, said to me, "Painting's like farts. If you force it, it's going to be shit." So.
Brilliant.
So yeah, taking that on board. Well, if if I don't feel it, I'm not going to force myself to do it because I'm not going to enjoy it. It's supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be something you enjoy. So you do it when you enjoy it. So yeah.
Good
That's
call.
wise words from the sage there too.
It was either Matt or it was Bob O'Connor. I can't remember which one told me that. It might have been both of them at different times.
Not Des O'Connor.
No, not Des O'Connor, no.
No.
And when you're getting to the point that the project's looking good in a practical state that you can go live with it, what do you do then? Do you sort of, does that project come to an end once the date has come and the game has been staged? So that's the other thing with projects, that sometimes they don't have an end point. And I think having an end point, which is what I've taken from you, you must have an end point and then you go and do something else. That's quite important as well.
Yeah, because like any army or any force or any project you do, you could keep carrying on. The French, the French French Revolutionary Wars project I did for VL6. Is it VL6 or VL5? I forget which one it was. But that was for 4 players, and that's a case of, well, I can up that to 6 players quite happily and do another 2 forces and things like that. And every single one of my games, like, occasionally, I'll be lying in bed at night going, well, if I just bought some British for the 1840s, I could use those Afghans for the first Afghan war. If I did this, and you start to think about all these different things you could do. Like for the Mexicans, I could use the Mexicans for the Maximilian adventure. I just need to buy some French and blah blah blah. That happens. That's whether you actually decide to go ahead and do that. Well, that's up to you, really. If you want to take another project on, but I always feel that there's links here and there for any of the games to be expanding in various different directions, so that the scenery and the figures can be used more than once and more in one game in more interesting scenarios.
Yeah, that's a classic wargaming 3 for 2 benefit, isn't it? You I found that very early on when I painted up Prussians and French for the Franco-Prussian War. I decided, well, if I buy Austrians, the French can fight the Austrians in 1859. The uniforms are a bit different, but who cares? That was in 15 mil, so you just get that general feel, and you think that's great. I've actually got a free army because I'm multi-purposing it, so that's good. So can I just come back to it? You actually work out your factions, for want of a better word, before you buy the figures.
I would say half and half. Right. I would say yeah. You have. I mean, with sharp practice, you know that you're going to need groups of 8 or 10. With chain of command, you have a rough idea of what the platoon looks like. So beforehand. For instance, for the Northwest Frontier, I wanted a unit of Highlanders and a unit of Sikhs. So I knew roughly what I wanted from there. The Afghans were the ones that kind of got away from me in that project. There just seemed to be more and more Afghans until there was massive amounts of them on board. Like, is this going to be balanced? But it turns out it was. I got it pretty much spot on, and that wasn't even working it out particularly well numbers wise. I just kind of went by feel and by gut more than anything else for them. But for the filibusters, it was a case of, right, I want to have some Mexican soldiers, want to have Mexican militia, I want to have filibusters, that a wide variety of figures from there, and I want this and this, that and that and that, and you work out in advance. I'm not very good at writing notes, so I don't write notes very often, but it's all in the head. I know what I want to do. I know what I want to get it done by, and I can work it all out week by week by week what I need to get done in order to reach the deadline. This
is a really logical, well thought out approach. So what you described there, Colin, is what I've tried to do with my Mexicans for the Alamo. In as much as so far I've only bought enough Mexicans to give me that core force. I bought enough to make sure that I can have however many it is, so the multiples of 8, isn't it, basically? Yeah. And then I've only got one. I've actually only got one packet of Texians at the moment, and I'm thinking, well, when I've done the Mexicans and I've got that core force, then I move on to the Texians, because I don't want to have a lead mountain where I know what I normally do is I see that and I buy it, and I see that and I buy it, and I see that and I buy it, and then because the purchasing is enjoyable, the shopping therapy is quite good fun. So it strikes me that your approach minimises your lead mounting. So reassure me Reassure me about the size of your lead mountain. Tell me that you've got a manageable pile of unpainted figures, and I'll start to believe that your approach makes sense.
No, it's horrible. I've got drawers and drawers and drawers. I've got some Albanians in there. I've got some pirates in there. I've got Cairo Janissaries hiding somewhere.
But so that's new projects. Have you got? Oh bloody hell! I've got 400 Mexicans that I've overbought for the Mexican.
No, I haven't done.
Let me tell you.
I haven't done that.
That's the difference.
I've just been basing up my Carthaginians today, and I went down the shed yesterday, and you see this big box? That's all duplicate Carthaginians that I don't need. So because I don't do what you do.
Well, for instance, so a project that's waiting for the next deadline is a infamy project. So late Romans and there'll be Goths, Alemanni, sort of barbarians, but a couple of 100 years later than
right.
And so they're all based, they're all done, they're all ready to go. I figured out exactly how many I needed for the project. I've got both sides sorted out, ready to go. So it's just, so I don't have any spares. Occasionally I find the situation's opposite. I've got one or two figures I've miscounted, and I've got one less in the unit that I should have, and then the panic starts. But yeah, I don't tend to overbuy when it's a project like that. I tend to just be quite. And I find that really difficult when, like for instance, Perry's sell them in 6s, and some other companies will sell them in 8s. And you're doing that maths thing, like how many packets do I need to buy in order to get 3 units out of this from this company? So I tend not to overbuy.
That's good discipline. If you can manage that, that's a really excellent thing, because it's as Rich has just demonstrated, the cost of that in terms of space and money is quite difficult. So this game that drives you, the show game, the games at Clotted Lard, or you said about Virtual Lard as well.
Yeah.
Tell me, do you game on a regular basis anyway, week to week, or is it these games that are your chance to get the figure on the table, and therefore is a bigger motivator to make sure you've got something that's that's good quality?
Well, the War Games Club I'm a member of in Exeter, so they meet second Saturday of every month, and so you basically volunteer to put a game on, or you just go along and play one of the games that's put on. So there may be 4, maybe 5 games on that week, and you got a choice what to do. So the ethos of the club is that you bring the entire game with you, and you put it on for everybody else, which is essentially what you do at Clotted Lard, for instance.
Yeah.
So when I first started going along, I was like, right, okay, I'm using everybody else's toys. And you want to go and you want to be one of the persons that comes along and puts a game on, and you want people to enjoy your toys and go, wow, woo. And that's a really good sort of example of a club working really well. I know in the past, years ago, when you wanted to do a historical game, you needed to try and find an opponent that was interested in the same period you were, and you would do one side and they would do one side, and it just never ever worked. And they would never get things painted, or you weren't that interested in being French or whatever it was. And then that approach I found no satisfaction in that approach at all. But to have the game that you put on, that you're interested in, you've painted all the figures and you know it works, I find that a much more satisfying approach to the whole war game.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do it and have always done it at our local club, because you know what it's like, as you rightly say. You say to your mate, I'll do the French, you do the British, and then your British are all finished, and he goes, oh, well, I bought them, but to be honest with you, I'm now doing these medieval turtles or whatever.
Are you speaking from experience there, Rich?
Yes.
I don't think I've got any medieval turtles, mate.
Well, I'm sure if you look harder, mate, you'll find them poking their head out somewhere.
Thank you.
Too much fibre there.
So we've got focus. So you're saying, Colin, I've been making notes here, right? I've been making notes. Focus, have a focus.
Yep.
Small goals, you said as well.
Yep.
Keep it real, you said.
Yep.
That's the only 3 things I've written down. What else have you said?
And the other thing is you've got to consider the scenery. I think it can spend as much time as one of the whole forces just on the scenery on the table. Work out how you're going to do it, how you're going to transport it. Now that's one of the big things, is because scenery tends to be bigger and lumpier and harder to pack away. And if you're going to take it out to a club or to a clotted lard, you need to make sure that you're able to transport it back and forward. But yeah, what I tend to do with scenery is I tend to be a bit optimistic with scenery. I know, for instance, for the French game for Virtual Lard, I started a vineyard and I started off various little back gardens and hills and things like that. And as the deadline got closer, because it was up at 6 weeks. It was 6 weeks from when I said I'd put the game on to actually getting everything done. I decided, right, vineyard doesn't matter. Don't need to do that. And again, you have to be prepared to cut things out if they're not necessarily. If you're just going to spend 2 weeks trying to get a vineyard to look right, you're going to miss out the time to paint a whole bunch of French figures and things like that. So you have to be prepared to nip back to get everything to fit into the deadline as well. But yeah, scenery I think is really important. It's probably something I learned from you lot, to be fair.
Discipline again, then. So it's knowing what you can achieve in the time available.
Yeah,
being prepared to change your plans in order to reach the end goal. Sid?
Yeah.
I think the thing with scenery as well, I mean, I'm completely with you, Colin. I think that takes as long as one of the sides. So if you've got a lot of figures, you're going to spend a good amount of time on the scenery for a good looking table. But I think the thing also with scenery is that it's trying not to create too much. I mean, one of the things which I liked about the game that I played in Southampton, the Jazz Age game, the scenery was just right. It fitted that table perfectly, but you didn't have masses of scenery you're getting out of the box. It was almost as if you'd done it for that game, and that was great. But I could see, and I've also seen from your photos, that you've moved the scenery around in different games. So it's having scenery which is versatile, portable, but also fits that game, but not too much scenery.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to use mats on my table, so rolled mouse mat type mats on the table, and then movable scenery that will fit on top of that. That does, you kind of miss the idea of having built-in hills into the table and things like that. So at times I've thought, well, I could do a fully modelled table and put hills and dips and terrain features and things like that. But like you say, that removes the versatility from what you're building.
Totally.
Unless you're really careful about the way models. And I've never really liked those tables where you can see the lines of the separate blocks and things like that of the table. But yeah, you have to be. I basically think about what I'm capable of building and what's going to fit and what's going to be able to look nice in various different places. So those hills from that Northwest Frontier game, they're on the table in the garage now. I was playing a science fiction game with my 8-year-old. So they're perfectly versatile. They're great hills, and I can use them in several different places. But they're always going to be the Northwest Frontier hills, but can be used in other places. And the Mexican game, there's some of the Charlie Foxtrot buildings, lovely buildings, so I can use them in Mexico, but then I can also use them in Italy for the First Coalition game, things like that. So scenery is one of these things that is far more movable than figures when it comes to sort of periods and places. So yeah, working smart is far more work smart, not hard, basically.
Okay.
Stuff. And what's your next one then? What's your next project?
So the infamy one's ready to go. So I've got, I think, how many units have we got? I've got something like 7 units of barbarians, and then roughly same again of late Romans. I've got some of the Romans done already, so that happens quite a lot. I might do one part of a force for a project and then go, right, put them away, and they're in a box for God knows how long, and then they come back to life, as it were, resurrected from the foam packaging wherever they are in the garage. Go right, add the rest of it and build it up, because I've not really had a chance to play Infamy in real life yet. No. The only Infamy games I've had have been virtual ones, and I've really enjoyed them. So it's went right, time to put a project on, build up forces, and then learn how to play it properly.
Fascinating insight. It's really interesting how an organised mind works, isn't it? It's brilliant.
I've never seen one before.
Yeah, I think that's the first time anybody's ever said my mind was organised. My wife certainly wouldn't agree, I don't think.
Well, that was a really great section. Thank you very much for that. But however, we haven't brought you all the way here to Lard Island just to discuss that, because today you're also going to be the first contestant in our new Lardy game show. So while I put on my Versace sequin jacket and don my best TV host smile, let's cut to the music.
The defenestration of lard.
So Colin, welcome to this, the very first edition of The Defenestration of Lard. And this is a show where we invite you to put on trial one aspect of wargaming that you think should not just be confined to history, but actually hurled through the highest window on Lard Island to be dashed to smithereens on the jagged rocks below. So I know, Colin, that you have one such issue. So we're going to ask you to argue your case to our panel here. And if they agree with you, then you get the pleasure of seeing your subject matter hurled to its destruction. However, to make things more fun, if they disagree, it'll be you who's hurled from the window, defenestrated by our trusty Lard Island retainer, Igor. So we have put you in the straitjacket to avoid any unnecessary unpleasantries. And I must ask you, Colin, are you comfortable?
Yes, surprisingly.
Okay.
Make it tighter. Tighten it, Igor.
That would just be more comfortable, wouldn't it?
Yes, master.
Okay, well, it could certainly be a big night tonight if you play your cards right. So, Colin, what's the issue or thing that you would like to see subjected to the defenestration of Lard?
My thing is points, and points in army lists. Generally, having grown up through Warhammer and 40k over the years, my distrust and dislike of points and army lists has only grown. One of my oldest mates still works for Games Workshop, and he's done for years and years and years. But he's been my mate since we were 11. And every time I go and see him, he lives in Nottingham. Every time I go and see him, I just fancy having a knockabout game, having a great bit of a giggle, bit of a laugh, couple of beers, as you do. But he drags the points lists out, and he works out exactly which points go in which figures, and he works out which ones are gonna be, and it's just tedious, and it drives me nuts because he's always got the best possible army worked out on paper before, and he'll disappear. I'll be in his house talking to his wife. He'll disappear to a little corner for an hour, writing down his army list on a piece of paper. And just he gets very zoned into it. He always likes it. I remember people describing character generation for role-playing games as lonely fun, and I think for him, writing an arm list is lonely fun. It's all about that. That's the part that he really enjoys, and I can't stand it. I find that the points lead just to competitiveness, rather than having a good laugh and a good giggle. And calling each other names. It's all about who's going to win the game. I can put on a better army than you on the table, and I find that reduces my fun. I don't get much fun out of that because I'm just like, oh, okay, on you go, kill what you need to kill. Let's move on. And then that kind of competitive leads on to tournaments, and tournaments make my teeth ache. Really, God say, it's just I can't think of anything worse than standing in the hall with loads of other guys that just really want to beat you. Really want to beat you with their toy soldiers. I thought, it's not about. I mean, obviously you want to win a game. You want to be able to win a game of Chain of Command or Sharp Practice, whatever like that. But you want to have good fun doing it. And if the only reason you're standing opposite somebody else on the table is because you're there to win a tournament and you're there to beat them with your fantastic army list, then it kind of takes away any possibility of fun, really. I also find them unrealistic, horribly unrealistic. there's obviously another reasonably popular World War II game that nobody ever mentions, but I'm in a couple of Facebook groups just so I can look at the pretty figures and see how they painted things up. And the conversations about the way that they set up their armies it's like, what? That would never happen in real life. That's just ridiculous. Why would that be there? Why would they do that? It's removing that realism from the game that you're trying to play. I mean, obviously we're well aware that these little men aren't talking to us and they're not real and they're not marching about on the board. But at the same time, you want to be trying to reproduce something that might possibly happen. And it removes, as well as promoting the competitiveness, I find that it removes the gentlemanly conduct. I mean, I want to be pointing out to somebody else that I'm playing a game with, well, you could have done that with them. You could have done that with them. And how many times have we both been, all right, you can just do that again, but do it that way. Allowed people to move their figures in another direction when they change their minds, or maybe re-roll it again just for a more interesting ending to a game. And competition, points, competitiveness, remove that. It wouldn't benefit you to point out to your opponent that you've done something wrong, because you want to win, because you want to be the best on the table. And it encourages sneakiness as well. Sneakiness. Building something into your army list, using the points that they're not going to expect. Ha ha! Jumps out and kills all your figures. And it's I don't like that about a game. A game should be gentlemen squaring off against each other across the table, both with equal chances to win, both knowing what they're doing, and both there to enjoy themselves. And it's not really why I'm into the gaming anymore, really. And it becomes the point where the points are more important than the game. And the points are there because they're there to produce balance. And the idea of balance is just not realistic, not a gaming term that you should be ever thinking about, because balance is not something you would ever run into in a real life scenario, in a war or a conflict or a skirmish of any sort. No one's standing at the back of the field going, no, you've got 5 men on there already. The rest of you need to sit down and have a bacon sandwich. On you go. And I find the striving to balance everything out based entirely on points just ruins some games, I find, and ruins the experience for me. So that's me. That's why I don't like points.
Oh, well, you certainly
Fairly
provided us.
comprehensive deconstruction of points, but is it enough for defenestration? So possibly time to turn to the panel.
Well, Mr. Murray, you raised some very good points when you discuss points. You know, the simple fact that history doesn't work on a points basis is really relevant. Now, I think on this, no general of any army would take his army into action on a points equal basis. They're always striving for a massive points advantage, so you can be sure that you will overwhelm your enemy. However, by so doing, what you're creating is a game that's therefore imbalanced. If you are hugely overscoring your partner and you turn up with 50,000 points against his 100 points, then how can that be a fair contest? And points is how do you look through at what point do we choose to limit our window and measure the points at that stage, so we can have a game of chain of command or bolt action or any other game set that uses points, and you can say we're equal on this particular table, we're equal in points, although the army and war itself might be massively out of equilibrium in terms of the way the points are distributed. And points maybe allow us to get that kind of versatility on the table. Let me ask you a question. How do you balance your historical games? So the filibusters, the Jazz Age, when you're playing Sharp Practice or Chain of Command, how do you balance those games?
Generally, I do it by eye. And based on the scenario, I will run through what I expect the scenario to do in my head, or play it actually on my own in the garage, like some strange hermit in the garage playing away on my own. But yeah, a couple of times I'll run through the scenario, see if it works, see if I have to add bits and pieces there. Well aware that obviously there are points in chain of command, but they are not the entirety of the army generation. You're basing your army on realistic platoons, or your force, sorry, on realistic platoon constructions, and that's the basis of what you're building on. The idea that you're going to give your support points and allow that sort of partially balance on top. But even then, you'll find that attackers have more support points than the defenders, or the other way around, depending on the scenario. You'll find there's an imbalance in points in chain of command anyway, because of the different support points that they're getting, depending on the scenario. So that, to a certain extent, yeah, there are points and they have their uses, but they shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of the game. That's what I find difficult.
And to what extent would you counter the argument that by getting rid of points, you're in fact being you're taking the fun out of the lonely fun out of gaming for your chum in Nottingham? How do you feel about being the person who takes the fun out of gaming for other people? Would that not be what would happen if we defenestrated point systems?
Well, to use the same argument against him, he's taking the fun out of it for me by being such a git. To be fair,
perhaps we can put him cut him out the window.
This is not about being fair.
No,
but have your say anyway.
Yeah. So he's oddly, he will not play World War II games or World War I games. He doesn't want to play anything past Napoleonics. He finds it too close to home. So another
too close to home. How old is he?
Same age as me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to revisit a very British Civil War from way in the past and put two forces together for that. So and play chain of command using those forces. So it's a way of getting around his issue with playing World War II games and still getting a game of chain of command, because I really want to play that kind of game with him, because he's one of my oldest mates. I know he's a clever sod when it comes to playing on the battlefield, and I just want to give him a different challenge.
Okay, well, first of all, let me say that I grew up starting gaming in the 1970s and obviously continued ever since then. And one of the things that I think really provided a seismic shift, not for the better, in the hobby was the introduction of points-based competition gaming in the late 70s, early 80s. And I totally agree with you that it does, whether it's conscious or subconscious, it does place the primary emphasis on winning and maxing your force, even if that means that the army list that you're producing is ahistoric and is not representative of anything that would ever have seen the battlefield. The system almost obliges you to go down that route. And I would certainly agree that for me, that removes the fun. So there's a lot of common ground here. The concept of balance is also, I think, a strange one, because our tabletops are usually not symmetrical. So we point up the forces, but we don't take into account the fact that one side may have a tactical advantage simply by the ground that they're fighting over. So that, as I say, there's a lot of common ground there for me. However, I'm a guy who's been publishing rule sets for a long time now. And I can assure you that we never used to have point systems in our rules in the same way as we never used to have color, because I used to say, people don't need color. The rules are not improved by having color. I'm not going to do it because I'm not pandering to people's demand. But you know what? When we introduced color and when we introduced points, it made those games more accessible to people who hadn't purchased them before. So as a commercial decision, it was the right thing for us to do. But also from the point of view that you want to provide people with a bridge from where they were to where they subconsciously want to be, which is playing the type of games that you enjoy, that I enjoy, where you throw your force together and you wet your finger and put it in the air to see which way the wind's blowing, and you go, yeah, that'll work, and it normally does, and if it doesn't, you go, some reinforcements have arrived, and you march them on at the appropriate moment. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you a lot, but at the same time, if we were to throw those point systems away, if we were to defenestrate the point systems, and not you, Colin, it would mean that many people would not find that access key to the door that would allow them to step through into the bright, sunny uplands of narrative gaming. And that is simply the route to that. And it's not a back passage to that round some sneaky way. This is the M1 that leads them all the way, straight away through Watford Gap, past Newport Pagnell, to their destination of narrative fun games. But without that M1 there, it's not a journey they'd be making, mate. So I hate to tell you, but Igor is standing by. Sid, what can I say? I am saying, do not defenestrate point systems for all their faults. And much as we love Colin, I would have to say to this court that he is the guilty party for whom defenestration is the only appropriate punishment.
Oh gosh. What can I say? I mean, I think that's a well-argued case. I think it's a difficult one, to be honest.
Not difficult, it's bloody easy, and I explain why.
So here's if we allowed the defenestration of the point system, then we would have to put the burden of research back onto the ordinary gamer.
We would. But I do think that if we are going to defenestrate Colin in an ideal world, we should strap him to his mate in Nottingham, who definitely probably deserves defenestrating onto the jagged rocks more than Colin does. But unfortunately, that man is in Nottingham and Colin is here with us today, and the gods demand a sacrifice.
Hang on, is this just a way of you actually killing me so you can get my figures?
Oh, Christ, I shouldn't have mentioned that.
I do.
I think that all of those arguments are going in one direction. So the majority...
And so are you.
Right, that points in wargaming may not be everyone's cup of tea, but they do still have a place, even in the most narrative of games. So as Igor steps forward, can I ask, have you enjoyed coming on the show?
I really have. It's been a brilliant time. I panicked there for a couple of seconds there because I could hear my 6-year-old screaming for his mom outside the door, but I don't think any of you heard that, so that's fine. But yeah, no, it's been a great giggle. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's been great.
Do you think he was listening in and is aware of your imminent fate?
No, I think he was hungry more than anything else.
I think you'll find it was Igor strapping him to the trebuchet.
Well, the only thing we've got left to say, Colin, you've been a great guest, but sir, choose a window, you're leaving. And as we wave goodbye to Colin on his descent, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. But before we go, I'd like to mention a couple of Lardy events, both in this year, 2021, and also next year, 2022. So to start off with, we've got Virtual Lard 6th on the 10th of July, 2021. And we've also got Clotted Lard in Exeter on the 18th of September this year, followed up by Steel Lard in Sheffield on the 20th of November, 2021.
Look out of the window!
Then next year, looking forward, we've got Operation Market Larden. It's now in the diary for the 11th of June 2022, and Deep Fried Lard in Musselburgh, Scotland looks to be taking place on the weekend after that on the 11th of June 2022. So don't forget to mention to tell us all about your Lardy related events. And finally, a shout out to Seth Donaghy in Ontario, Canada, whose wife Tara wrote in to say how much she enjoyed the Oddcast and how it's kept him sane during the last crazy year. Happy birthday, Seth. So that's all we have time for tonight. My thanks as always for joining us, and we will see you again on the next Oddcast. My thanks to Rich, Nick, and of course Colin for for being such a good sport. There he goes now, in fact. And of course, to Roger Barraclough and the gang who will play us out, thank you and good night.
Tonight's show, Sydney Roundwood was joined by Nick Skinner and Richard Clark, with music by Roger Barraclough and his band.